Grow your practice, grow your wealth, grow your impact. Find out how to spend less time in the dental chair and more time on the things you love.
Welcome to the Dental Wealth Podcast. Glad to have you back for another episode. I was looking at my phone today and I got some messages about the podcast that came out this morning. You know, people saying, hey, look, that was a great ride in. That was really helpful. You know, thanks for that message. And, and look, please keep sending those things along. I keep getting on here and saying the numbers keep going up, and they are. And so that's exciting. And so my thanks to you for listening and for sharing and to talk about the content. And so I really appreciate it. Got a few thoughts that are going through my mind, and I think one of it today was, you know, there's this, anyone who pays attention to sports at all, you don't have to be a tennis fan, but, you know, Djokovic got kicked out of the U.S. Open, and I was watching this and thinking through what an impact this has. And what is that impact on you know, what should we take from that? Because there's part of me who saw this and thought, well, by the way, if you don't know the story, I guess I should give you the backstory first, which is, you know, here we have one of the top tennis players in the world who's at the U.S. Open. Now, interesting to know about this U.S. Open is a lot of people did not come this year. A lot of the top players, the Nadals and Federers, didn't come play because of the fact that, you know, whether it's COVID or whatnot, I assume it is, they weren't going to come to the United States and they weren't going to come to the tournament. So this is really, truly, in a sense, if you're the producers, everyone's relying on Djokovic, right? He's the one saving grace of this tournament. I mean, he's like the name that everyone's coming to see, and in a sense, he becomes the Tiger Woods of the tournament. And so everyone's wanting to see the number one seed win, and they're all excited, and they're like, thank gosh he showed. I mean, you got to think about this from a producing standpoint. You're like, thank gosh, like he showed, because if he didn't show, like, what would we have done? And sure enough, everyone I know is watching this tournament, and he ends up getting frustrated and hitting a ball, and it hits a lineswoman in the throat, and he ends up becoming disqualified from the tournament. So he gets kicked out of this tournament. Now, if you're a sponsor or anybody related to the tournament, this is like by the way, this was an ethics question for everybody too, right? Because ultimately it's like, this is our saving grace. This guy is going to be the reason why people come watch this tournament. And yet we're going to have to disqualify him. And like, there's so many parts of this that we can look at and say, like, what does that have to do with a dental practice or business as a whole? I mean, we could certainly look at the ethical concerns, and by the way, there was there's arguments to be made that he should have been kicked out. There's been some arguments, I've seen it on TV, some of the sportscasters arguing that they should have, because, and their arguments, a lot of it has to do with, hey, look, the fact that like nobody was watching except for this guy, and we should be thankful for this guy showing up, because if not, nobody was going to watch. Unless you're an avid tennis fan. I mean, I'm one of those guys who I watch 4 tournaments a year. I watch pretty much the majors, and that would be the only time I'd tune in. And so now I'm tuned out, right? I'm one of those guys too. Now I'm not going to watch any other matches. That was the only person I was going to watch. But they put ethics first, and they did disqualify him ultimately. But it made me think about attitude for a moment. And you know, it's interesting in this podcast. You know, we could, in this podcast, tackle so many things. And I think that's always a challenge when I'm thinking about what I want to talk about on this podcast. You know, ultimately, I could get into a lot of numbers, and we could work through statistical problems and regression analysis and how it affects businesses and all these other things that might lose half of you and you turn it off 5 minutes in. You know, and the great thing about this podcast is it allows me to kind of just go off script and kind of talk about just plainly, you know, some things that I see on a daily basis. And, you know, the lucky thing is that I get to see all these dentists and see their success and see their failures too when they're not doing certain things. And so it allows me to then elaborate on certain things. And so, you know, I appreciate you allowing me to do that, but this is also a great thing for you. And it's a great thing for you because, you know, you get kind of the just unadulterated version of like, what's the truth? Like, what do I need to know? And I'm not trying to sell you anything on this podcast. This is not, time to pitch you something or something like that. This is just more or less me telling you what successful people do in your profession and what successful people don't do. Like, what are the failing people doing? What are the failing practices doing? And, a lot of times on this practice, I think last podcast I was saying, look, what's holding you back? What fear is holding you back? What is that fear that's holding you back? What is the thing that's holding you back? And, people saying, I don't want a $30 million practice. And I challenging that and say, that's not true. You don't want to do the work that it takes to be 30 million. And I would argue that's not even true. I would argue that you're fearful of what you don't know. That's the truth. And you've told yourself story, it's about time and it's about other issues, and it's not. That's just not true either. And so, kind of debunking some of these thoughts. I want to talk about something that when it made me think about when I saw this person, Djokovic get expelled, was this idea of like, what is the state that determines success? And I broke out my own personal journal here, and I'm gonna kind of read you something that I wrote here, and a thought that was put out to me once upon a time, and then I'm gonna repeat back to you. And the thought was this: people are relying on you. People are relying on you. And so what I was challenged by somebody in my life when we were having this conversation about what I'm building and what I want to build in my own goals. And the question went back to me, and I posed the same question to you. It's because this comes to this ethical conversation, and it comes to attitude. It comes to attitude whether it determines success or not. And someone said to me, Eric, understand that everyone's relying on you, that people are relying on you, that people that have never been hired by your organization are relying on you, that people whose lives will be impacted by the organization you created or create are relying on you. And here's a better question. What if everybody who had an ethical obligation to use their skill sets to the fullest walked away? What if everybody who had the ability to use this potential, and in fact, this is self-actualization, this actualization of who we believe ourselves to be. And what does that have to do with attitude? It has to do everything with attitude. What is the attitude we take when we hear about that? And how much does it limit us? And look, ultimately speaking, you can say, well, Djokovic just got mad and he just hit a ball. I would argue that there's a lot of limiting factors, but his attitude limits him in so many things. And his attitude just ended up costing him the U.S. Open. Now, you may believe he was going to win or not going to win. Who knows? But I firmly believe he probably was going to win. And so he cost him a major that ultimately could have cost him, it could, depending on what his career goes, could end up costing him the true record of Grand Slams. I mean, we don't know ultimately what that anger costed him, that frustration. And for you, it might not be an anger where you get mad, but it might be something where you've taken the attitude or position that I don't want this, or I'm not going to do this, or no one's going to teach me. It's interesting as I watch people who, it's an attitude of I've got that. I've always said there's like 4 types of people, right? I've said it on this podcast that there's people that are the poor me's who are always complaining, the people that are help me that are willing to take the help but they don't know what to do, the people that say leave me no matter what you do, they can't be fixed, and then the transformative people, the grow me, the people that just want to get better and better and better. But ultimately, people find themselves in one of those buckets because it's attitude. And that attitude controls their altitude. And ultimately speaking, and I need you to hear me on this, like the attitude controls the altitude and the trajectory. And in this situation, it was of a Grand Slam. But ultimately, this is a major, this major he could have won, but what's it costing you? And I'll tell you this, is that people have these limiting mindsets, but a lot of it's attitude. It's people that think they know it all. Here's the cool part, like the people that I work with that are most successful, my most successful people I work with, the highest revenue practices, the people that do the best, walk out of every event that I do with pages and pages and pages and pages of notes. Can't get enough. The people who are not successful, they walk out with nothing. And they say, I've heard it all before. Now, it's their attitude, isn't it? It's their attitude. It's a state that they walked in. Then how do you take two people and you put them in the same room and one person has it all figured out? Like I could take somebody, like I've had clients that I've taken and doubled their revenue in 12 months and they quit. And they quit because they think they've got it all figured out. Now, it's the same person who thinks that they can, quit the personal trainer and they'll just remember the exercise. They're going to go back to doing it the way they were doing it before. I promise you. They will go back to doing, because that's what humans do. When things work well, we stop doing them. I mean, seriously, if you lose 40 pounds by not eating cheeseburgers, okay, and you lose 40 pounds, as soon as you lose 40 pounds, what's the first thing you'll tell yourself you can do? Eat a cheeseburger. You'll just do it in what? Moderation, right? You'll moderate your cheeseburger eating. Does that ever work? Well, no. And so what ultimately happens is the attitude around this idea of like, but then athletes would never do that. Like I wouldn't put that in my body. I wouldn't consume that. Like it's a completely different mindset. Can attitude cost you a grand slam? Can it cost you a major? Can it cost you that? Absolutely it can. Can it cost you a career? Yes. Can it cost you a pay raise? Yes. Hell, half your employees would double their income if they had different attitudes. I'm serious. Like people control their trajectory by their attitude. A person who walks in with an amazing attitude and the right spirit and is high-fiving and doesn't mope around and is smiling all the time gets paid more than somebody who's depressed and whining and moping, and it's just the way it is, right? So that's just the nature. We want to be and gravitate around people who are successful. And what happens in business, it's the same thing. The doctor who thinks about how can I grow? How can I become? How can I create? How can I get better? Spending time with those people, by the way, they attract people who are positive, who are driven, who want to get better, who want to find the next level. And the doctor who thinks they know it all, guess who they hang out with? The doctors that think they know it all. And they all sit around this table of people who are mediocre in their practice and wonder why they can't get ahead. And they can't get ahead because it's their attitude. And ultimately speaking, what they'll say is, well, I didn't learn enough there, right? I didn't learn enough. I didn't get enough action steps. I didn't get enough this. I didn't get enough that. No, that's not the problem. You're the problem. We all need to hear that sometimes. I tell you that because your attitude does control your altitude. The ability to grow, the ability to do absolutely amazing things, the ability to have the life is literally between your ears. And I'm telling you that because I'm telling you I'm literally one of the most successful clients I work with who will listen to this podcast ultimately. Because why? That's a great thing. He listens to every podcast. He listens to everything. Can't get enough of it. And like this person the practice is just insane what they're doing and growing and building and creating, and he can't get enough. Like he can't get enough. He's like, I put that in place. I do this. I do that. I do this. What about this? What about that? What about this? And he's just, his attitude is controlling his altitude. And I think ultimately speaking, he'll probably have one of the largest practices in literally the United States. And it's just because of the way he thinks. And what happens in all of us, and this is, by the way, if you're listening to this going like, not me, it's probably you. Like I'm just being honest with you. And we all need to hear it sometime, because I believe that people are relying on you. that people are relying on you to build something, to create something, whether it's your kids, whether it's your church, whether it's your family, whether it ends up being, the future team members who would have been part of that, whether it had been the impact of the organization that you created that impacted people. Like, you start to think about like organizations that have been built. Someone said to me this, Eric. They said, Eric, I wrote this down in my journal. I thought it was really good. Now, by the way, I don't know anything about Bangladesh, so this was a quote for somebody else, okay? So don't take any offense to it. But he said, if everybody walked away from their obligation in the United States of reaching their potential, if everyone had the attitude that they were going to not live up to the potential that they have, the United States would be Bangladesh. And by the way, I don't know anything about Bangladesh. I don't take that as the part. The problem is the point is that the United States is the most innovative country in the world in so many ways. And we have so many, look at what we've done from entertainment to technology. And at the people who had the ability to go and create amazing things walked away because they thought they knew it all, because they thought they had all the answers. What happened is we would have never been able to be what we are today as a country if every single person walked away from their ethical obligation to success. Like, you have an ethical obligation to success, and I truly believe you have an ethical obligation to do that. And if everyone walked away from their ethical obligation to success because their attitude was, I don't need that, I don't want that, I don't have to deal with that headache, and if everybody walked away, this country would have never lived up to its potential. Hell, it wouldn't even be here. It's kind of an interesting thought, right? Like, that we wouldn't even be here as a country if people did not go, we can do better. And think of a different way to do it and say, look, we can do better. We can live better. And so I think through that. And then I was reading a quote yesterday. So I'm constantly reading and thinking, and so kind of how I live my life. And this was the quote. It said, I'm making more time for the people who want me to be the best version of myself. I'm making more time for the people who want me to be the best version of myself. I thought, man, that's so interesting. Attitude. I want to hang out because really what that says is I want to spend time with people who have great attitudes and attitudes about my success, and they want to see me do well, and they want to see me build a great organization, and they're relying on me, and they're hoping for me, and they're building for me. And that stuff will never happen if you don't have the right attitude. I'm serious. You can say, well, Djokovic got kicked out because he just made a mistake. Bullshit. It's an attitude. That's what happened. His attitude eventually had a result that was catastrophic. And I'm telling you on this podcast that your attitude, if you're not careful, will have a result that's catastrophic. Now, to you, you might not think it's catastrophic, but to the possible hundreds, thousands, and possibly millions of lives that you never impacted, it's catastrophic. They're relying on you. People are relying on you. And it's an attitude that you take up. It's the sword that you own is this attitude of, hey, I'm going to go build something that's so freaking amazing because people are relying on me. And if everybody walked away, we would not be the country we are. We wouldn't be the organization that I have an ethical obligation to build something. And so everyone I'm in front of, I will learn from. Everything I will get from. I will pour myself in. It's interesting. I start thinking about what I spend on self-education per year versus the average doctor, and it's mind-blowing. And it's like, what do you think happens? Like the people who grow the most spend the most. It's just true. Like, I think the best investment I can make is me. What about you? It's just an attitude thing, right? It's just an attitude. My attitude is that, hey, I'm the best investment. Stock market's not the best investment. Shit, stock market can't come close to do what I can do. The stock market cannot come close to do what you can do. So you'll put $4,000 a month in the stock market, but you won't put $400 in yourself. That's called not understanding ROI, right? So like this attitude of like, you have to own this attitude. And while Djokovic would, if anyone studies Djokovic knows that wasn't just a one-time right thing. It wasn't, right? This is a pattern of behavior. And then the pattern of behavior ends up having results. Remember, I always talk about the compound effect. Look, this was the compound effect. It was just the compound effect that eventually yielded a result. The compound effect happens in your life. It's these little things that happen over a period of time that ended up resulting him acting like an ass, hitting a ball, possibly severely injuring somebody, by the way, and getting disqualified. And then on top of that, I mean, what are the ratings going to be for the U.S. Open? We can talk about the financial consequences of his actions because, by the way, he hurt a lot more people than, by the way, just himself. I will promise you this. The financial consequences of him getting eliminated from that tournament have a huge effect on, I guarantee it affected people's lives financially. And I'm not just talking about the Hollywood executives or NBC executives. I'm talking about people, because those aren't the people that get hurt, are they? The stuff rolls down. The people who got hurt are probably people that he'll never even hear of. And the same thing happens with you. The people who ultimately get hurt are people you've probably never met and never will. And so, now, gosh, it might seem grandiose, right? That might seem like, wow, Eric, this is like way out there. Like, who are these people you're talking about? And I'm just talking about you. I'm talking about you for a moment. What's the attitude you take towards success? Look, it's all a compound effect. It's all a compound effect. It's what you do every day. It's a compound effect. So we think about it. You might say, well, Eric, I'm happy. You can be happy and unsuccessful. You can. Economically speaking, right? We're talking economics. This is an economics dental wealth podcast. It's an economic podcast. So I want you to think about this. Is your attitude, now, last podcast what I was talking about is big numbers, like how do you hit these big numbers? But in this podcast, I'm not even talking about those big numbers. I'm saying flat out is even today, no matter where you are, is your attitude towards success? Is your attitude towards growth? Is your attitude towards personal development? Is your attitude towards courses you take? Is your attitude affecting your ability to grow? Are you creating like this artificial wall? And this wall that you've created in your mind that doesn't let things through. And because you don't let the things through, then what ultimately happens is you're not going to have the success. Just like Djokovic will not win the U.S. Open, you'll end up not having the success that you want in this lifetime or this month or this week because of the fact that you've limited. What limiting things are you doing to yourself right now? What attitude are you bringing up right now in your life that's limiting ultimately your ability? Now, by the way, it might be your marriage. By the way, does your marriage affect your business? Yes. It might be your health. Does your health affect your business? Yes. Right? There's no such thing as a single lack. Everything affects everything else. So we start actually thinking about this and saying, look, your attitude, the way you wake up, like literally the way you wake up, the way you walk into a room, the way you pour into your physical well-being, the way your attitude around what you consume, your attitude. Now, when I say consume, it doesn't just mean food. It means what kind of things are you taking in? People will spend 4 or 5 hours watching sports, but they won't spend 4 or 5 hours watching education. I'm not against sports. I like them quite a bit myself, but I'm making a point here, which is attitude. Attitude is everything. That's not a quote by me, right? Attitude is everything, right? Who came up with that quote, attitude is everything? Well, because attitude affects everything, and that's what it's true. And so this idea is like our attitude every single day. By the way, here's the thing. Can you wake up overnight? Like this is like grandiose to be like, wake up overnight and be like, yes, today I have an amazing attitude. Well, that's just crap. That's not how this works. But it does work to say, where is my attitude off, and where can I strategically go to work at it? And so by sitting down and writing down and be like, where is my attitude off? And I would challenge you to do that. Like sit down and write down, like, where does my attitude? Is it around my marriage? Is it around relationships? Is it around my business? Is it around my ability to grow? Is it around the program that I'm taking? Is it around, limiting my beliefs? Where does my attitude need adjustment? And where do I go to work at? Because ultimately speaking, I'm giving you, see, when I'm talking right now, I'm thinking about some of the most successful people I work with, and I'm like, you can skip right by this podcast. That's not necessarily true. They need to still work on attitudes as far as self-limiting beliefs. But ultimately speaking, you guys know who I'm talking to, and you're like, yeah, I work on my attitude all the time. And then the people who are struggling, by the way, we're all struggling with different things. So it doesn't mean anyone's better than the other. It just means that, look, we're all struggling with different things. But ultimately speaking, you have to look at this and say, is my attitude towards things affecting my ability to win, to grow, to get to the next level? Where does my attitude need some help? Where's my focus? We all focus. I mean, sometimes we walk into a room, like if you go into an education program, what's your attitude walking in? And so it's like, mine's always like, I just want to get a few nuggets that I can work with. Everyone's is different, but like, I'm trying to be a better person every day. I'm trying to grow and grow my skill set and hang around successful people. Like, what is your attitude towards those things? I have an attitude towards success. Like, so I understand that people are relying on me, and that I have an ethical obligation to not walk away. Hell, this podcast is about an ethical obligation, nothing more. I want to see you be successful. I want to see you live up to your full potential. I want to see you do everything you possibly can. And it starts by eradicating those parts in us that we truly need to eradicate. And some days you'll wake up and you'll forget that part ever even existed. But when we figure out what those parts are and we go to work on those, now remember, all good will be attacked. As soon as you start improving, there'll be somebody who comes out of the woodwork and tells you why you shouldn't improve or how that's nonsense. I promise you, the second you start moving away from your circle, when you start improving and start getting better, people in your circle will ultimately push back against you and tell you why it's not going to work and tell you why that's silly. Maybe it's a spouse that will do that. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's a peer. But when you start growing yourself and you start changing your attitude, you'll start to alienate the people, and those people are worried you're going to leave them behind. And you will. Guys, thanks for listening. Look, put this stuff in place. Sit down. Put the steps in place. I'm telling you what the most successful people do. This is about creating an organization of abundance and impact. And it's about figuring out all those places. So look, sometimes we don't want to look at the places where we struggle. We want to look at our successes and our high fives, and we don't want to confront, right? Americans are weird about confronting. We don't want to confront the ugly parts. But the truth is that we can eliminate those things and figure out why we think that way. It can change the truth, our trajectory. And I'm telling you, the amount of success that you can have, is undeniable and unbelievable. But it starts with attitude. Hey guys, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.